The iron gates of the Hale estate clanged shut with a finality that echoed through Clarissa's bones. But all she felt was the savage satisfaction of a woman who'd finally taken control. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we dive into this story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love connecting with you all. And hey, if you haven't already, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this one. Now, let's get into it. Clarissa Hale stood at the second-floor window of her marble-floored mansion, watching the young black woman stumble down the cobblestone driveway, one hand clutching a battered suitcase, the other cradling her swollen belly. The security guards had already retreated inside, their faces carefully blank. The afternoon sun made the woman's tears glisten like diamonds she'd never be able to afford. Good riddance. Clarissa's manicured fingers pressed against the cool glass. She'd spent the last 20 minutes screaming, actually screaming, in front of the entire household staff, her voice cracking as she'd called the maid a whore, a gold digger, a snake who'd slithered into their home to steal everything Clarissa couldn't have. The girl had begged, actually gotten on her knees on the Italian tile, her pregnant belly making the position awkward and pitiful, pleading for just a few more days to find somewhere safe. Clarissa had laughed, a cold, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You should have thought about safety before you opened your legs," she'd hissed, and ordered security to throw her out immediately. Now, watching the maid, Amara, her name was Amara, though Clarissa refused to humanize her with it, disappear beyond the gate, something twisted in her chest. Not regret, never regret. Just the familiar ache of 7 years, 14 IVF cycles, and countless nights lying awake listening to Victor's breathing beside her, wondering if he blamed her for their empty nursery the way she blamed herself. The house felt too quiet now. The staff had scattered like roaches when light hits, probably gossiping in the kitchen about Mrs. Hale's breakdown. Let them talk. Clarissa had spent years perfecting her armor, the designer clothes, the charity galas, the practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was Mrs. Victor Hale, wife of the billionaire tech mogul whose face graced Forbes covers. She had everything except the one thing that would make her matter. She turned from the window, smoothing her cream silk blouse, and that's when she heard it. The front door. Victor's Mercedes had purred into the garage while she'd been watching Amara leave. Her pulse quickened. He'd been at the downtown office all morning. He didn't know yet. Didn't know she'd finally done something, taken action, protected what was theirs. Clarissa descended the spiral staircase with her head high, practicing the words. There was a situation with one of the staff. I handled it. You're welcome. But when she reached the foyer, Victor was already there, standing beneath the crystal chandelier, and his face was the color of ash. 3 members of the staff stood frozen nearby. Maria the housekeeper, James the butler, and young Thomas, who worked in the gardens. They all looked at her with something that made her skin prickle. Pity. They were looking at her with pity. Victor, Clarissa said, forcing brightness into her voice. I'm glad you're home. I need to tell you about... Where is she? Victor's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the cavernous space like a blade. Clarissa blinked. Where is who? Amara. He took a step toward her, and she noticed his hands were shaking. Actually shaking. Maria just told me what you did. Where is she? The satisfaction drained from Clarissa's body, replaced by something cold and slithering. I removed her from our home. She was inappropriate, Victor. The way she looked at you, the way she's 8 months pregnant, and you threw her into the street? His voice rose now, cracking with something Clarissa had never heard before. Panic. Raw, undisguised panic. Do you have any idea what you've done? I protected us, Clarissa shot back, her own voice climbing to match his. That gold-digging little... Clarissa. Victor's face had gone from ash to chalk white. He looked at Maria, at James, at young Thomas, and then back at his wife. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow, destroyed. Clarissa, she's carrying my baby. The world stopped. The chandelier's crystals caught the afternoon light, sending rainbow prisms across the marble floor. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Clarissa heard her own heartbeat in her ears, a deafening thunder that drowned out everything else. What? The word came out strangled. Victor's eyes, those green eyes she'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, were filling with tears. The baby. It's mine. God, Clarissa. She's carrying my child. But that wasn't even the worst part of what Clarissa was about to discover. Clarissa's legs gave out. She didn't remember sinking onto the bottom step of the staircase, didn't register Maria rushing forward with a steadying hand. All she could process was Victor's face. Guilt etched into every line, fear dancing in his eyes, and the impossible words still hanging in the air between them. My baby. My child. You had an affair. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Small. Broken. No. Victor ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, the same gesture he made when closing multi-million-dollar deals. But this time, his hands trembled. God, no. Clarissa. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? The shriek tore from her throat, years of suppressed rage finally finding its target. Because unless there's been some immaculate conception I'm unaware of, you put a baby inside that girl. The staff shifted uncomfortably. James cleared his throat. Perhaps we should... Stay! Victor's command froze them all. He turned back to Clarissa, and for the first time in their 12-year marriage, she saw him truly afraid. They need to hear this too. They all need to understand. Clarissa's mind raced, grasping for logic in the chaos. Amara had been working for them for 6 months. Quiet, sweet Amara, with her downcast eyes and gentle smile. 24 years old, Victor's assistant had said when recommending her, recently moved from Atlanta. Excellent references. Clarissa had barely noticed her beyond the growing belly, too consumed by her own failures to pay attention to the help. How long had Victor been sleeping with her? How many times had Clarissa been at her fertility appointments while he was upstairs with, "It was supposed to fix us"? Victor's words cut through her spiraling thoughts. He moved closer, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. After the last IVF failed, after Dr. Morrison said your body couldn't, I couldn't watch you break anymore, Clarissa. I couldn't watch you hate yourself. So you found someone else to carry your precious heir? The bitterness in her voice could strip paint. I found a solution. Victor pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket, his hands still shaking. Or I thought I did. 12 months ago, I contacted a private agency, arranged a surrogacy, legal, documented. Everything by the book. The envelope landed on the marble floor between them. Clarissa stared at it like it might contain a live grenade. That's not possible. I would have known. I would have had to sign the Caldwell Trust. Victor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The offshore account my father set up before he died. The one I've never told you about. The world tilted again. Clarissa grabbed the stair railing, her knuckles white. The Caldwell Trust. Victor's father, Richard Hale, had died 8 years ago, leaving his tech empire to Victor. But there'd been rumors. Whispers at the funeral about hidden assets. Wealth even the lawyers couldn't track. "How much?" she whispered. Victor met her eyes. 2.7 billion, separate from everything else. And according to the surrogacy contract, he paused, his throat working. The biological mother has rights, legal rights, to the child, to the trust. And that's when Clarissa realized she hadn't just thrown out a maid. She'd thrown out the woman who could take everything. The envelope felt like fire in Clarissa's hands. She'd snatched it from the floor with shaking fingers, tearing it open while Victor watched with the resignation of a man facing execution. Inside were documents, legal documents with gold-embossed seals, and signatures she recognized as her husband's. Her eyes scanned the words, but they barely registered. Surrogacy agreement, gestational carrier, parental rights, asset distribution. And there, on page 7, highlighted in yellow as if someone wanted to make absolutely certain she'd see it. In the event of successful live birth, the biological mother shall retain co-guardianship rights and shall be entitled to 40% of the Caldwell Trust assets as compensation and security for the child's future. 40% of $2.7 billion. $1.08 billion, Clarissa whispered, doing the math automatically. You gave that girl access to over $1 billion. I gave our child a future, Victor corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. The contract was supposed to be straightforward. She carries the baby, we raise it, she gets compensation, and moves on, clean, simple. Where did you even find her? Clarissa's voice was climbing again. How does one shop for a womb, Victor? Was there a catalog? Maria shifted near the doorway, and Clarissa's gaze snapped to her. The housekeeper's dark eyes held something, knowledge, maybe sympathy, that made Clarissa's blood run cold. You knew. It wasn't a question. How many of you knew? The silence answered her. I hired her through the agency, Victor said quickly, trying to regain control of the conversation. She needed the money. Her mother was sick, medical bills. Oh, how charitable of you. Clarissa's laugh was jagged glass. And then what? The agency just said, here's your baby incubator. She also does windows. The agency collapsed. Victor's admission came out strangled. 3 months into the pregnancy. Federal investigation. Fraud charges. The whole operation went under. Amara had nowhere to go. The contract was through them. All the legal protections. The medical oversight. Everything disappeared overnight. Clarissa's head was spinning. So you brought her here, into our home, made her a maid. I was protecting the investment, protecting the baby. Victor's composure finally cracked. What was I supposed to do? Let her end up in some shelter? Let something happen to my child? Your child? Clarissa stood, the documents clutched against her chest like armor. Not ours, yours, and hers. Before anyone could stop her, Clarissa was moving, past Victor, past the frozen staff, toward the front door. Her Louboutins clicked against marble like gunshots. She had to fix this. had to find Amara before the girl realized what she'd just walked away with. "Clarissa, stop!" Victor lunged for her arm, but she jerked away. "She has no idea, does she?" Clarissa spun on him. "About the money." "The trust. You never told her she's carrying a billion-dollar baby." Victor's face gave him away. That flicker of calculation she'd seen 1,000 times in business meetings. "Oh my God," Clarissa breathed. "You were going to steal your own child, take the baby, hide the contract, and what? Pay her off with pocket change?" And that's when the doorbell rang, and everything Clarissa thought she knew shattered completely. Nobody moved. The doorbell chimed again, an elegant, melodic sound that seemed obscene against the destruction unfolding in the foyer. James finally stepped forward, his butler's training overriding the shock, but Victor's bark stopped him cold. "Don't!" "It might be her," Clarissa whispered, hope and dread warring in her chest. "She might have come back." Victor shook his head slowly, and something in his expression made Clarissa's stomach drop. She wouldn't ring the doorbell. The chime came a third time, followed by sharp, authoritative knocking. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the door, Clarissa could make out two figures, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably official. "Mr. Hale?" a male voice called through the door. "This is Detective Morrison and Detective Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you about the Caldwell Trust." The color drained from Victor's face so fast, Clarissa thought he might collapse. "How did they—" "Open the door, Victor." Clarissa's voice had gone eerily calm. "Or I will." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw 12 years of marriage crystallize into this single moment. Every charity gala where she'd smiled until her face hurt. Every business dinner where she'd been the perfect accessory. Every lonely night in their king-sized bed, wondering why she wasn't enough. "There's more, isn't there?" she said softly. "More you haven't told me." The knocking intensified. "Mr. Hale, we can obtain a warrant." "James, open it." Victor's surrender came out as barely a whisper. The butler moved mechanically, his hands steady despite the chaos, as he pulled open the massive front door. Two detectives stood on the threshold. Morrison, a black woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, and Chen, younger, Asian, with a tablet already in his hands. "Mr. Hale." Morrison's gaze swept the foyer, taking in the frozen tableau. "We're investigating irregularities in the Caldwell Trust. Specifically, several large transfers made in the last 72 hours. She paused. "Transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." Clarissa's head snapped toward Victor. "What did you do?" "I was protecting us," he said. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. "If Amara found out about the full value of the trust, you started moving the money." Clarissa's voice was hollow. "You were going to empty the account before she could claim her share." 40% of $2.7 billion, Chen read from his tablet, according to the surrogacy contract filed with the fertility agency before it collapsed. "That's quite a sum to try to hide, Mr. Hale." "How do you even know about the contract?" Victor's voice cracked. "Those records were sealed when the agency went under?" Morrison's smile was thin. "Someone sent us copies. Anonymous tip that came in about 6 hours ago. Very detailed. Bank statements, contract clauses, even security footage from this mansion." Her eyes locked on Clarissa, including footage from earlier today, of a pregnant woman being forcibly removed from the premises. The world was spinning too fast. Clarissa gripped the stair railing, her mind racing. 6 hours ago. That was before she'd confronted Amara. before she'd thrown her out. "Who?" she breathed. "Who sent you the files?" Chen turned his tablet around, showing a grainy video still. It showed Victor's private office, the one even Clarissa rarely entered. In the image, a man sat at Victor's desk, downloading files onto a flash drive. The timestamp read 3 days ago, 2:47 a.m. But it wasn't the timestamp that made Clarissa's blood run cold. It was the man's face, clearly visible in the desk lamp's light. "That's James," she whispered, spinning to face their butler. James stood by the door, his expression unchanged, utterly professional. "Indeed, madam." "You?" Victor's voice rose to a roar. "You've been in my employ for 15 years. Why would you—" "16 years, sir," James corrected calmly. "Since just after your father passed away. Mr. Richard Hale was a good man. He trusted me with many things." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded letter, yellowed with age. "Including this. Instructions on what to do if you ever attempted to access the Caldwell Trust for inappropriate purposes." The letter landed on the floor between them, next to the contract. "My father knew," Victor's voice had gone hollow. "About the surrogacy? Your father knew you'd eventually try something desperate." James's mask finally cracked, showing genuine disappointment. "He knew you'd inherited his ambition, but not his honor. The Caldwell Trust was meant for legitimate heirs, Mr. Hale, not bought ones." Clarissa felt hysterical laughter bubbling up. "So you've been spying on us for 16 years? "Protecting the estate," James corrected. "And when I discovered what Mr. Hale had done, using his father's legacy to purchase a child like a commodity, I knew it was time to act." He turned to Morrison. "You'll find all the evidence you need on that drive. Wire fraud, tax evasion, illegal surrogacy payments, everything." Victor lunged forward, but Chen stepped between them. "Mr. Hale, I'd advise you to remain calm." "Where is she?" Morrison's question cut through the chaos. "Where is Amara Bennett?" The name hit Clarissa like a slap. Bennett. She hadn't even known the girl's last name. "I don't know," Victor admitted. "Clarissa had her removed. Over an hour ago," Morrison finished. "Thrown out with nowhere to go, 8 months pregnant, in the middle of a heat wave." Her voice hardened. "Do you understand that if anything happens to her or that baby, you're both liable?" But before anyone could answer, Maria stepped forward, pulling out her phone with a trembling hand. "I know where she is," the housekeeper said quietly. "And you're not going to believe who came to pick her up." Maria's phone screen glowed in the dimming foyer light, showing a photo that made Clarissa's knees buckle for the second time that day. Amara stood on a downtown sidewalk, her suitcase at her feet, climbing into a black Mercedes S-Class. But it wasn't just any Mercedes. Clarissa recognized the custom plates. Hale 1, Victor's father's car. The one that had been in storage for 8 years, locked in a climate-controlled garage across town, untouched since Richard Hale's death. And behind the wheel sat a woman Clarissa had only seen in oil paintings hanging in the mansion's west wing. A woman who was supposed to be dead. That's not possible," Victor stammered, snatching the phone from Maria's hand. "My mother died 6 years ago. I was at her funeral. I gave the eulogy." "You gave a eulogy at a funeral," James corrected quietly. "Mrs. Eleanor Hale is very much alive, and she's been watching everything." Morrison exchanged a glance with Chen. "Someone want to explain what's happening here?" But Clarissa was already moving, her mind putting pieces together with terrifying clarity. Eleanor Hale, Victor's mother, Richard's widow, had supposedly died of a heart attack in their summer home in Martha's Vineyard. Closed casket funeral, private cremation. Victor had handled everything, kept Clarissa at arm's length, said it was too painful to discuss. "You faked your own mother's death." Clarissa's voice was barely audible. "I didn't." Victor's protest died when James pulled out another photograph. This one showed Eleanor Hale, very much alive, sitting in a cafe 2 months ago, with Amara. The pregnant girl's hand rested on her belly while Eleanor smiled, reaching across the table to touch her arm with unmistakable affection. "Your mother knew about the surrogacy," Clarissa breathed. "She arranged it," James said simply. "After Mr. Victor's 4th failed IVF attempt, Mrs. Eleanor came to me. She was dying, actually dying, lung cancer, and wanted to ensure the Hale line continued. But she didn't trust her son to handle it properly." He gestured to the photo. "She was right not to." Victor's face had gone from white to gray. The agency, the collapse, that was all. "Staged," Morrison finished, her expression grim. "We've been investigating the Caldwell Trust for 6 months, Mr. Hale. Your mother contacted the FBI before she supposedly died. She wanted us to monitor every transaction, every move you made." She pulled out handcuffs. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for wire fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy to defraud." "Wait!" Clarissa's shout stopped everyone. "If Eleanor is alive, if she set this all up, then what is Amara? Who is she, really?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Maria and James exchanged a look that made Clarissa's stomach turn to ice. "Show her," James said quietly. "She deserves to know." Maria pulled up another photo, this one older, the colors slightly faded. It showed a young woman, maybe 20, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She stood next to a tall, silver-haired man, whose face Clarissa knew as well as her own. Richard Hale, Victor's father, and between them, a baby girl with a shock of dark curls. "Meet Amara Bennett Hale," Morrison said softly. "Richard Hale's daughter, from a relationship before he married Eleanor. Born 24 years ago in Atlanta. Raised by her mother, Diane Bennett, who recently passed from cancer." She paused. "The same cancer Eleanor Hale was supposedly dying from. The same cancer that apparently runs in the Bennett family." Clarissa's mind was fracturing. "She's Victor's half-sister." "And the biological heir to the Caldwell Trust," Chen added. "According to Richard Hale's original will, the real one, not the version Victor presented to the courts, Amara was always meant to inherit the entire trust, all 2.7 billion. Victor made a sound like a dying animal. "The baby. Oh, God. The baby. Isn't yours," James finished. "The surrogacy contract you signed, the agency that supposedly matched you with a carrier. All of it was orchestrated by your mother and Amara to get her into this house, to document your corruption, to prove you were unfit to control your father's legacy. And that's when the front door burst open again, and Amara Bennett Hale walked in, very much in control, with Eleanor Hale beside her and a team of lawyers behind them both. Clarissa had thought the floor couldn't drop any further. She was wrong. Eleanor Hale moved like a queen reclaiming her throne, spine straight, silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Amara's entire wardrobe. At 72, she was still breathtaking, still terrifying, and she looked at Clarissa with something worse than hatred, pity. "Hello, darling," Eleanor said to Victor, her voice silk over steel. "Surprised to see me?" Victor stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The handcuffs dangled from Morrison's hand, momentarily forgotten as everyone stared at the ghost, who'd walked back into their lives. Amara stayed close to Eleanor's side, one hand protectively cradling her belly. But there was something different about her now. The meekness gone, replaced by a quiet strength that made her seem taller. This wasn't the scared maid Clarissa had thrown out. This was Richard Hale's daughter, and it showed in every inch of her bearing. "You all look so shocked," Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping the foyer. "Did you really think I'd die quietly while my son destroyed everything his father built?" She turned to Clarissa. "And you, dear, tell me, how does it feel to realize you've been a pawn in your own marriage?" The words hit like a physical blow. Clarissa's voice came out strangled. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know any of this." "Of course you didn't." Eleanor's expression softened fractionally. "Victor specializes in keeping secrets, don't you, darling?" She moved closer to her son, who'd begun shaking. "Tell your wife the rest. Tell her why you really married her." "Mother, please," Victor's voice cracked. "The Whitmore Family Trust," one of Eleanor's lawyers spoke up, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s. "Clarissa's inheritance from her father, $300 million that became marital property the day you said, 'I do.'" She held up a document. "Money that Victor systematically drained over the last decade to cover his gambling debts." The room tilted. Clarissa gripped the banister so hard her nails dug into the wood. "My father's trust? That's in a protected account. I would have had to sign—" "You signed dozens of documents," the lawyer continued mercilessly. "Papers your husband told you were for joint investments, property transfers, tax shelters. You trusted him. He robbed you blind." Clarissa looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. 12 years. 12 years of her life, her love, her desperate attempts to give him a child, all of it built on lies. "The IVF treatments," she whispered. "Were they even real?" Victor's silence was answer enough. "Oh, they were real," Eleanor said softly. "Real enough to drain your accounts further. Real enough to break your spirit. But Victor made sure they'd never work. Sabotaged medications, altered schedules, stress that would guarantee failure." Her voice hardened. "He needed you barren and desperate, easier to control." Clarissa's legs gave out. She sank onto the stairs, everything she'd believed about herself shattering. The shame she'd carried, the failure, the inadequacy. It had all been manufactured, weaponized against her. The word came out as a sob. "Why would you do this to me?" Victor finally found his voice, and what came out was worse than anything Clarissa could have imagined. "Because you were supposed to be temporary, a means to an end." His laugh was hollow, broken. "I was going to divorce you once I'd secured your money. But then the Caldwell Trust came into play, and I needed the optics. The stable marriage, the desperate wife trying for a baby." He looked at her with something like regret. "You played the part so perfectly." Morrison stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Mr. Hale." "Wait!" Amara's voice cut through the chaos, soft but commanding. She moved toward Clarissa, her belly making the approach awkward. Up close, Clarissa could see Richard Hale in her features, the strong jaw, the intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Hale, Clarissa, I need you to know something." Clarissa couldn't look up, couldn't face this girl, this woman who represented everything she'd lost. "The baby I'm carrying," Amara said gently, "it's not Victor's. It was never Victor's." Clarissa's head snapped up. "What?" "The surrogacy contract was fake, a prop. I've never been artificially inseminated, never been anyone's surrogate." Amara's hand moved over her belly. "This is my baby. Mine and my boyfriend Marcus's." She stopped, shook her head. "My boyfriend Tyler's. We've been together 3 years. Then why?" Clarissa couldn't process fast enough. "Why pretend?" "Because we needed Victor to believe he had an heir," Eleanor interjected. "Needed him to act on his worst impulses, transfer money, hide assets, show the world exactly what kind of man he really is." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "And you, Clarissa, were the perfect unwitting witness." Before Clarissa could respond, Chen's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the screen. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "Someone just transferred the entire Caldwell Trust, all $2.7 billion, to an account in Dubai. It happened 3 minutes ago, and the transfer was authorized by a fingerprint that belonged to someone who wasn't even in the room." The name on Chen's screen made everyone freeze. Clarissa Whitmore Hale. "That's impossible," Clarissa breathed, staring at the authorization details. "I'm standing right here. I didn't transfer anything." "Your fingerprint was scanned at 4:47 p.m. from a secure terminal at Hale Industries' downtown office," Chen read, his voice tight. "Authorization code matched your biometric profile perfectly." Victor's face transformed, shock giving way to something calculating, almost triumphant. "You did this. You found out about the trust and decided to take it all for yourself." "I was here!" Clarissa's shriek echoed off the marble. "I was throwing out your fake mistress while you—" She stopped, realization hitting like ice water. "Wait, who has access to my biometrics?" The question landed like a grenade. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Victor required all family members to register fingerprints for the security system when you renovated 2 years ago." "And those files are stored where?" Morrison demanded. Victor's silence spoke volumes. James stepped forward, his professional mask finally cracking into anger. "Mr. Hale maintains a private server in his office. Biometric data, passwords, financial records, everything he needs to operate independently." "To steal from his own wife," Amara added quietly. Her hand still rested on her belly, but her eyes blazed with fury. He could authorize transfers under her identity any time he wanted. But Clarissa was already moving, her mind racing past the betrayal to something more urgent. If someone has access to Victor's server, they have access to everything. Bank accounts, properties, legal documents. She turned to Eleanor. "Including the real Caldwell Trust documentation, the one that names Amara as heir." The elderly woman's face paled. "Victor, what have you done?" "Nothing," but his eyes darted toward the stairs, toward his private office on the 3rd floor. "The server is encrypted, military-grade security. No one could—" A new voice cut through the chaos. "Actually, it was pretty easy." Everyone spun toward the doorway, where a young man stood, mid-20s, dressed in ripped jeans and a hoodie that seemed criminally out of place in the opulent foyer. Thomas, the gardener. Except he wasn't holding gardening tools anymore. He held a laptop, its screen showing lines of code that made Chen's eyes go wide. "Thomas?" Maria's voice was small, confused. "What are you—" "My name isn't Thomas," the young man said calmly. It's Daniel Whitmore, Clarissa's younger brother. The world stopped spinning and started fracturing instead. Danny? Clarissa's whisper was broken. But you've been in Europe. Dad's money sent you to… Dad's money ran out 3 years ago, Daniel said, his voice hard. When Victor drained the trust, I came back to find out why my sister stopped returning my calls. Why her emails sounded like they were written by a stranger. He glared at Victor with pure hatred. Found out my brother-in-law had turned her into a shell of herself while stealing everything our father left us. So you got a job as a gardener, Eleanor said slowly, piecing it together. To spy on my son. To protect my sister. Daniel's fingers flew over the keyboard. Been documenting everything for 8 months. Every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. He looked at Clarissa with eyes full of pain. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but you loved him. You wouldn't have believed me. Clarissa's laugh was broken glass. I would have called you crazy. The transfer, Morrison interrupted. Did you authorize it? Daniel's smile was sharp. I did. Using Clarissa's biometric data that Victor so helpfully stored on his poorly secured server. He turned the laptop around, showing a different screen. The money's not in Dubai. It's in an escrow account, frozen pending legal review. Every penny documented, traceable, clean. You're admitting to wire fraud, Chen said carefully. I'm admitting to protecting my sister's inheritance from a thief, Daniel corrected. Big difference. Victor lunged forward, but Morrison's hand on his shoulder stopped him cold. The handcuffs finally clicked into place around his wrists. Victor Hale, you're under arrest. Wait! Amara stepped forward, her voice urgent. If the money's frozen, if all of this is going to court… She looked at Eleanor with fear creeping into her eyes. What happens to my father's company? To the employees? To everything Richard built? Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at the young woman, her late husband's daughter, the heir he'd always wanted. That depends on what Clarissa decides to do. Every eye in the room turned to Clarissa, who stood on the stairs holding the pieces of her shattered life, and suddenly held all the power. Clarissa looked at the faces staring at her. Eleanor's cautious hope, Amara's quiet desperation, Daniel's fierce protectiveness, Victor's barely concealed fury, and felt something shift inside her chest. For 12 years, she'd been small, apologetic, desperate to be enough. She was done being small. Detective Morrison, Clarissa said, her voice steady for the first time that day. I want to press charges against my husband for fraud, theft, emotional abuse, and whatever else you can make stick. Victor's face contorted. Clarissa, don't be stupid. Shut up. The words came out quiet, but lethal. You don't get to talk to me anymore. You don't get to manipulate, gaslight, or control me ever again. She descended the stairs slowly, every step deliberate. You made me believe I was broken, that my body was the problem, that I was the failure. Her voice cracked, but held. You destroyed me from the inside out, and you did it with a smile. Mrs. Hale, the lawyer with Eleanor, spoke up carefully. If you pursue charges, this will become very public. The media attention alone. Good, Clarissa cut her off. Let everyone see what Victor Hale really is. Let every woman who's ever felt less than, who's blamed herself for her husband's cruelty, know she's not alone. She turned to Eleanor. You knew what he was doing to me. You watched from whatever hole you were hiding in, and you let it happen. Eleanor's mask cracked, showing genuine shame. I thought you were part of his schemes. that you knew about the money, the gambling. By the time I realized you were another victim, I was already committed to this plan." "Then help me now." Clarissa moved to stand beside Amara, the gesture deliberate. "Help me dismantle everything he's built on lies. Help me give Richard's company to someone who deserves it." Amara's eyes widened. "You don't even know me." "I know you're Richard Hale's daughter," Clarissa said softly. "I know you walked into this house willing to risk everything to expose the truth. I know you're carrying a child you want to protect, and I know what that desperation feels like." She held out her hand. "I also know you didn't have to include my name in that escrow account. Daniel could have frozen the funds under his own authority, but you made sure I was protected too." It was a guess, but Amara's expression confirmed it. "The escrow is split 3 ways," Daniel explained quietly. 40% to Amara as Richard's heir, 30% to Clarissa as restitution for the Whitmore Trust, 30% held for investigation into Victor's other activities. Money we're pretty sure he's hidden in additional accounts. Chen nodded, checking his tablet. "We've identified at least 6 offshore accounts tied to Mr. Hale. Conservative estimate puts the total hidden assets at another 400 million. Victor's face went gray. "You can't prove—" "We can," James said simply. "I've been copying files for 16 years. Every transaction. Every secret account. Every order." He looked at his former employer with disgust. "You should have honored your father's memory. Instead, you spat on it." Morrison tightened her grip on Victor's arm. "Victor Hale, you have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda rights faded into background noise as Clarissa watched her husband, ex-husband, she corrected mentally, being led toward the door. He turned back once, his eyes meeting hers with something that might have been regret. "I did love you," he said quietly. "At first." Clarissa felt Daniel's hand on her shoulder, Amara's presence beside her, even Eleanor's supportive gaze. She was surrounded by truth, painful, messy, complicated truth, but truth nonetheless. "No," she said clearly. "You loved what I could give you. There's a difference." As the door closed behind Victor and the detectives, the foyer fell silent. Then Amara's hand found Clarissa's, squeezing gently. "What happens now?" the younger woman asked. Clarissa looked around the mansion, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings of a family that had never really existed. Then she looked at the people surrounding her. Her brother, who'd risked everything to protect her. The half-sister she'd never known existed. The mother-in-law who'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme for justice. Even the loyal staff who'd kept secrets to protect a dead man's legacy. "Now," Clarissa said, a real smile breaking across her face for the first time in years, "we rebuild, all of us, together." 6 months later. The nursery wasn't what Clarissa had imagined during all those years of failed IVF treatments and desperate prayers. It wasn't in the cold, museum-like mansion she'd shared with Victor. That monstrosity had been sold. The proceeds split between restitution funds for Victor's victims, and there were many, and a foundation Clarissa had established for women escaping financial abuse. This nursery was in a warm brownstone in Brooklyn, with morning light streaming through gauzy curtains and walls painted a soft yellow that reminded Clarissa of hope. She stood in the doorway, watching Amara rock her daughter, their daughter, in the ways that mattered, while humming something soft and melodic. Little Maya Bennett Hale had arrived 3 weeks early, screaming her way into the world with all the fierce determination of both her bloodlines. She had Tyler's warm brown skin and Amara's delicate features, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Clarissa's thumb, something in Clarissa's heart had healed. "She's finally asleep," Amara whispered, carefully placing Maya in the handcrafted crib that Eleanor had insisted on buying. "Third time this morning." "Babies don't read schedules," Clarissa said softly, moving into the room. Over the past months, she and Amara had built something unexpected. Not quite friendship, not quite family, but something precious in between. They'd cried together, laughed together, and slowly learned to trust the strange new reality they'd been thrust into. "How'd the meeting go?" Amara asked as they retreated to the kitchen, where coffee waited, and Daniel was already raiding the refrigerator. Victor took the plea deal. Clarissa poured herself a cup, savoring the bitter warmth. 15 years, eligible for parole in 8. He'll have to testify against his associates in the gambling ring, forfeit all hidden assets. She paused. His lawyer tried one last time to negotiate access to the Caldwell Trust. "What did you say?" Daniel asked around a mouthful of leftover pizza. Clarissa's smile was sharp. "I told him the trust belongs to Richard Hale's legitimate heir. Victor has no claim, no rights, and no future in this family." She turned to Amara. "The final paperwork came through. As of this morning, you're the sole controller of the Caldwell Trust and majority shareholder in Hale Industries." Amara sank into a chair, her hand trembling slightly. $2.7 billion. I still can't wrap my head around it. 2.9, actually, Eleanor's voice called from the hallway. The elegant woman entered, carrying shopping bags that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "The investments have been performing well." She kissed Amara's cheek. Then Clarissa's, the gesture now natural after months of tentative bridge building. Eleanor had revealed the full truth in the weeks following Victor's arrest. She'd been diagnosed with lung cancer 4 years ago, given 6 months to live. She'd used that time to fake her death, undergo experimental treatment in Switzerland, and orchestrate the plan to expose her son while ensuring Richard's true heir inherited what was rightfully hers. The cancer was in remission now, and Eleanor had thrown herself into grandmother duties with surprising tenderness. "I brought gifts," Eleanor announced, pulling out tiny designer outfits that made Amara laugh. "She's 3 weeks old. She'll grow out of these in days." "Then I'll buy more." Eleanor's smile was unapologetic. "Richard would have spoiled her rotten. I'm simply carrying on the tradition." The doorbell rang, and Daniel jumped up. "That'll be Tyler. He texted from the airport." Amara's face lit up in a way that made Clarissa's chest ache with vicarious joy. Tyler Chen, no relation to the detective they'd discovered with amusement, had been finishing his medical residency in California when Maya arrived early. He'd been flying back and forth every weekend, desperate to be with his daughter and the woman he loved. When Daniel opened the door, Tyler burst through with the energy of a man who'd been away from his family too long. He swept Amara into his arms, kissing her thoroughly before pulling back to search her face. "How are you? How's Maya? Is everything—" "We're perfect," Amara assured him, laughing. "Better than perfect." Watching them, Clarissa felt that familiar pang, not jealousy anymore, but a bittersweet acknowledgement of what she'd lost. Or maybe what she'd never really had. "Hey!" Daniel appeared at her elbow, reading her expression too easily. "You okay?" "Yeah," Clarissa said, and meant it. "I really am." It was true. The divorce had been finalized last month. Victor's assets, the legitimate ones, had been divided according to the prenup he'd insisted on, which ironically protected Clarissa more than it did him. Between her restored Whitmore trust, the settlement from the divorce, and her share of the escrow account, Clarissa had more money than she'd ever dreamed of. More importantly, she had freedom. "I talked to Dr. Morrison yesterday," Clarissa said quietly, using her brother as her sounding board the way she'd learned to do. "Not the detective, the fertility specialist." Daniel's eyebrows rose. And she confirmed what I suspected. There was never anything wrong with me. Victor had been sabotaging the medications, just like Eleanor said. Clarissa's voice remained steady, the pain of it duller now. "I could have children. Could still have them if I wanted." "Do you want to?" Daniel asked gently. Clarissa looked toward the nursery, where Maya's soft breathing could be heard through the baby monitor. "Maybe someday, with someone who actually loves me. Or maybe not. I'm learning that my worth isn't tied to my ability to reproduce." She smiled at her brother. "Right now, I'm focusing on being the best Aunt Maya could ask for, and the best sister to Amara, and maybe, eventually, the best version of myself." "Speaking of which," Eleanor called from the living room, "the board meeting is next Tuesday. Are you prepared?" Clarissa had surprised everyone, including herself, by accepting a position on the restructured Hale Industries board. Amara, as majority shareholder, had insisted. "You understand the business side," she'd said. "And more importantly, you understand what it's like to be underestimated. We need that perspective." "I'm prepared," Clarissa confirmed. "James sent over the quarterly reports. We're proposing the new Ethics Oversight Committee." "Good." Eleanor's approval was hard-won and therefore precious. "Richard would be proud. Of both of you." As if summoned by her name, Maya began to fuss. Tyler immediately moved toward the nursery, but Amara caught Clarissa's eye. "Would you?" she asked softly. Clarissa didn't need to be asked twice. She found Maya red-faced and working up to a proper cry, her tiny fists waving with indignation. Clarissa scooped her up, and the baby immediately settled against her chest, finding comfort in the familiar heartbeat she'd come to know. "That's it, sweet girl," Clarissa murmured, swaying gently. "You're safe. You're loved. You're going to grow up knowing exactly how precious you are." Maya's eyes, still that unfocused newborn blue, blinked up at her, and Clarissa felt something slot into place. A piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. She'd spent 12 years trying to create a family with a man who'd never valued her. Now she stood in a borrowed nursery, holding a child she hadn't given birth to, surrounded by people connected to her through trauma and truth rather than blood. And she'd never felt more like she belonged. "Hey, Clarissa?" Amara appeared in the doorway, Tyler's arm around her waist. "We've been talking about Maya's godparents." Clarissa's breath caught. "Amara, you don't have to—" "We want it to be you," Tyler said firmly. "And Daniel, your family, the kind that matters." Eleanor materialized behind them, her eyes suspiciously bright. "And I," she announced, "intend to be the most insufferable grandmother in New York. Fair warning." Daniel raised his coffee mug from the kitchen. "To the weirdest, most dysfunctional, most perfect family ever assembled through corporate espionage and financial fraud." They all laughed, real, genuine laughter that echoed through the brownstone and made Maya startle before settling back against Clarissa's chest. Later, after Tyler and Amara had retreated for a much-needed nap, after Eleanor had left with promises to return with more unnecessary gifts, After Daniel had headed to his job at the tech startup he'd joined, Clarissa stood alone in the nursery again. She pulled out her phone and opened her social media, the account she'd created 3 months ago, the one where she'd started sharing her story. The comments section was full of messages from women who'd found strength in her honesty, who'd recognized their own struggles in her words. "Thank you for speaking out. You helped me leave my abuser. Your courage gave me courage." She typed a new post. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I'd been betrayed, manipulated, and broken down until I barely recognized myself. Today, I'm holding a beautiful baby girl who calls me Auntie. I'm rebuilding relationships with people I love, and I'm learning that healing isn't linear, but it's possible." To anyone out there feeling trapped, feeling less than, feeling like they'll never escape, you will. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but you will find your way back to yourself. And when you do, you'll discover that you were never broken. You were just buried under someone else's lies. Keep going. You're worth it. She hit post, then added a photo, her and Maya, both of them peaceful, both of them healing. The afternoon sun painted the nursery gold, and somewhere in the brownstone a family was being built from the rubble of old lies. Not a perfect family, not a traditional one, but theirs. Honest and hard-won and full of hope. And for Clarissa Whitmore Hale, soon to be just Clarissa Whitmore again, that was more than enough. It was everything.